The rain pounded the pavement like 1,000 angry fists, each drop stinging Caleb's face as he stood frozen outside the house he'd called home for 23 years. His family's voices still echoed in his head, his father's venomous shout, "You're no son of mine," and his mother's silent tears as she turned away. They'd thrown him out, his truth too heavy for their small-town Ohio hearts to bear. Caleb gripped the straps of his backpack, the only thing he'd managed to grab before the door slammed shut. He was alone now, the weight of his confession and gay still raw in his throat. But as the storm raged, a single light flickered in the distance, Grandma Ruth's house, a beacon of warmth at the edge of town. Ruth had always been different. At 78, she was the family's quiet rebel, the one who'd sneak him extra cookies and tell stories of her own wild youth. When Caleb showed up on her porch, drenched and trembling, she didn't ask questions. She pulled him into a hug that smelled of lavender and old books, her voice steady as she whispered, "You're home now, kiddo." Her house was a time capsule, creaky floors, faded wallpaper, and a kitchen that always smelled of fresh bread. Caleb sank into the couch, the weight of the night pressing into his bones. Ruth sat across from him, her eyes sharp despite the lines etched into her face. "They'll come around," she said, pouring him tea. "And if they don't, you've got me." But Caleb wasn't so sure. His father, Tom, was a pillar of their church, a man who saw the world in black and white. His mother, Ellen, followed Tom's lead, her love for Caleb tangled in fear of what the neighbors would say. His older brother, Nate, had just sneered, muttering "freak" under his breath. The rejection cut deeper than Caleb expected, a knife twisting with every memory of family dinners and backyard barbecues. Ruth's house became his sanctuary. She didn't care that he loved men. She cared that he was hurting. Over the next few days, she taught him how to make her famous apple pie, her hands guiding his as they rolled dough. "Life's messy," she said, flour dusting her apron, "but you keep kneading till it comes together." Caleb tried to believe her. He found a part-time job at the local diner, pouring coffee for truckers and dodging questions about why he wasn't at home. The town of Willow Creek wasn't big. Gossip spread faster than wildfire. Whispers followed him, Tom's boys one of those. He ignored them, focusing on Ruth's stories and the way her laughter filled the house. But the whispers grew louder. One night, Caleb overheard a group of men at the diner, their voices low and bitter. "Tom says the kid's a disgrace," one said. "Shouldn't be allowed near decent folk." Caleb's hands shook as he refilled their mugs, the words searing into him. He didn't tell Ruth, didn't want to worry her. But the town's judgment was closing in, a storm darker than the one that had driven him to her door. By the end of the first week, Caleb noticed small things: a cracked window in Ruth's car, a slashed tire on his bike. He told himself it was just kids, but the unease grew. Ruth noticed too. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, she squeezed his hand. "People fear what they don't understand," she said, "but we're tougher than they think." Her words held him together, but the cracks were spreading. Caleb lay awake at night, the creak of the old house sounding too much like footsteps. He didn't know then that the worst was coming, that the town's anger would soon ignite into something unstoppable. The days blurred into weeks, and Caleb settled into a fragile rhythm at Ruth's. Mornings were spent flipping pancakes at the diner, afternoons helping Ruth tend her garden. Her roses were her pride, their petals a defiant burst of color against the gray of Willow Creek. But the town's hostility simmered beneath the surface, a current Caleb couldn't ignore. One afternoon, he found a note taped to Ruth's mailbox, "Sinners burn." The words were scrawled in jagged red ink. The paper crumpled as if the writer's hand had trembled with rage. Caleb's stomach churned. He tore it up before Ruth could see. But the words branded themselves into his mind. He started noticing the stares more sharp. Judgmental glances from neighbors he'd known since childhood. At the diner, a regular named Hank, a burly man with a cross tattooed on his arm, refused to let Caleb serve him. "I don't want his kind touching my food," he growled. The manager, a tired woman named Barb, just shrugged. "Keep the peace, Caleb," she muttered. Ruth sensed his growing fear. One night, as they shelled peas on the porch, she spoke softly. "When I was your age, I loved a girl named Clara. Nobody knew she was my secret. But I know what it's like to hide who you are." Caleb froze, the pea pod in his hand forgotten. Ruth had never mentioned this before. Her eyes were distant, but her voice was steady. "I lost her to fear. Don't let it take you too." Her confession cracked something open in Caleb. He told her about Jamie, the boy he'd loved in secret during high school. Jamie had moved away after graduation, leaving Caleb with a hollow ache and a fear of being seen. Ruth listened, her hand warm on his. "You deserve to love out loud," she said. Her words gave him courage. He started texting Jamie, their late-night messages a lifeline to a world where he could be himself. Jamie was in Chicago now, studying art, his life vibrant and free. Caleb clung to their conversations, dreaming of a future beyond Willow Creek. But the town wasn't done with him. One evening, Caleb came home to find Ruth pale, her hands trembling as she held a brick that had been thrown through her kitchen window. A note was tied to it, "Get him out or pay." Caleb's heart pounded. "This is my fault," he whispered. Ruth shook her head fiercely. "This is their hate, not your shame." She called the sheriff, but he was Tom's old friend, dismissive and gruff. "Probably just kids," he said, barely glancing at the brick. Caleb saw the truth in his eyes. No one was coming to help. That night, he and Ruth boarded up the window. The hammers echo loud in the silence. Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the street, his mind racing. He thought of leaving to protect Ruth, but the thought of abandoning her tore at him. She'd given him everything: her home, her love, her courage. He couldn't let her face this alone. The next morning, Ruth was defiant, baking bread as if the world hadn't cracked around them. "We don't bend to bullies," she said, kneading dough with fierce determination. But Caleb saw the worry in her eyes, the way her hands lingered on the counter for support. The town's anger was a gathering storm, and Caleb felt its weight pressing closer. He didn't know how much time they had left, or what it would cost to stand their ground. The air in Willow Creek grew heavier, thick with unspoken threats. Caleb started checking the locks twice each night, his footsteps quiet on Ruth's creaky floors. The diner became a battlefield of whispers, customers leaning away when he passed. But Ruth refused to let fear win. She hung a rainbow flag in her front yard, small but bold, its colors a quiet rebellion. Caleb begged her to take it down. "It's not safe," he said, his voice tight. Ruth just smiled, her eyes glinting. "I've lived too long to care what cowards think." Her defiance was a fire, but Caleb feared it would burn them both. One night, Jamie called. His voice was a lifeline, warm and steady across the miles. "Come to Chicago," he urged. "You don't have to stay there." Caleb wanted to God. He wanted to, but leaving Ruth felt like betrayal. "She's all I've got," he said, his voice breaking. Jamie didn't push, but his silence held a promise. "I'm here when you're ready." The next day, Caleb saw his brother Nate outside the hardware store. His jaw tight, eyes cold. "You're ruining her life." Nate spat. "Leave before you get her hurt." Caleb's fists clenched, but he walked away, the words sinking like stones. Was he the reason Ruth was in danger? The thought gnawed at him, relentless. That evening, Ruth found him staring at the flag, his face pale. She sat beside him, her voice soft but firm. "You're not the problem, Caleb. Their hate is. Don't let it twist you." She told him about Clara again, how they danced in secret under the stars, how fear had stolen their chance. "I won't let it steal yours," she said. But the threats escalated. Another note appeared, this time nailed to Ruth's door. "Last warning." Caleb's heart raced as he tore it down, his hands shaking. Ruth called the sheriff again, but he brushed it off, saying they had no proof. Caleb wanted to scream. Proof was in the broken glass, the slashed tires, the hate in every stare. He started staying up all night, watching the street. Ruth noticed, her worry deepening. One morning, she pulled him into the kitchen, her hands steady on his shoulders. "You're not my bodyguard, kiddo. You're my family." Her words broke him, tears spilling as he hugged her. That afternoon, Caleb saw a group of men outside the diner, their voices low, eyes on him. Hank was among them, his cross tattoo gleaming in the sun. Caleb's pulse quickened. He texted Jamie, his fingers trembling. "I'm scared." Jamie's reply was instant. "You're not alone." But Caleb felt alone, the weight of Ruth's safety on his shoulders. He didn't know how to protect her, or if he could. The town's hatred was afire now, and he feared it was only a matter of time before it consumed everything. The fire came at midnight. Caleb woke to the crackle of flames and the acrid smell of smoke. He bolted upright, heart pounding, and saw an orange glow flickering through the curtains. "Ruth!" he screamed, scrambling out of bed. The hallway was thick with heat, the walls groaning as fire licked at the edges of Ruth's house. He found her in the kitchen, coughing, her nightgown singed. "Get out," she shouted, pushing him toward the door. But Caleb grabbed her arm, dragging her through the smoke. They stumbled onto the lawn, gasping, as the house roared behind them. Neighbors gathered, their faces pale in the firelight, but none moved to help. The fire department arrived too late. Ruth's home, her sanctuary, was gone, reduced to charred beams and ash. Caleb held her as she sobbed, her strength crumbling for the first time. The rainbow flag lay burned in the yard, its colors unrecognizable. The sheriff called it an accident, muttering about faulty wiring. But Caleb saw the truth in the crowd's eyes. Hank's smirk, the whispers that didn't stop. This was no accident. It was hate, deliberate and cruel. They stayed at a motel that night, Ruth's hands trembling as she clutched a photo of Clara she'd saved from the fire. "I should have protected you," Caleb whispered, guilt choking him. Ruth shook her head, her voice fierce despite her tears. "You didn't do this. They did." The next day, Caleb went to the diner, desperate for normalcy. But Barb fired him, her eyes avoiding his. "Customers are complaining," she said. Caleb walked out, the town's rejection a weight he could barely carry. He texted Jamie, "It's gone. Everything's gone." Jamie's reply was immediate, "I'm coming for you." Jamie arrived that evening, his beat-up car pulling into the motel lot. Caleb ran to him, collapsing into his arms, the world fading for a moment. Jamie's embrace was warm, real, a promise of something better. But Ruth was still there, her life upended because of him. Ruth insisted they stay strong. "We rebuild," she said, her voice steady despite the grief in her eyes. She found a small apartment in town, refusing to leave Willow Creek. "This is my home," she told Caleb. "They don't get to chase me out." But Caleb wasn't sure he could stay. The town felt like a prison, its walls closing in. Jamie offered him a way out Chicago, a fresh start. The choice tore at him: stay with Ruth, who'd given him everything, or follow his heart to a life he'd only dreamed of. Caleb stood at a crossroads, the motel's neon sign buzzing above him. Jamie's hand was warm in his, a quiet promise of freedom. But Ruth's courage anchored him to Willow Creek. He couldn't abandon her, not after she'd lost everything for him. Ruth rented a tiny apartment above the town's only bookstore, its walls thin and its windows drafty. Caleb helped her move in, carrying boxes of salvaged books and photos. The town's stares followed them, but Ruth held her head high, her defiance a shield. "Let them talk," she said, arranging Clara's photo on a shelf. "We're still here." Jamie stayed for a week, sleeping on a cot in the apartment. His presence was a lifeline, his laughter easing the weight on Caleb's chest. They stole moments together, walks by the river, quiet kisses under the stars. But Jamie had to return to Chicago, his art school demanding his time. "Come with me," he said again, his eyes pleading. Caleb's heart ached, torn between love and loyalty. He stayed. For now. Ruth needed him, and he owed her everything. They spent evenings rebuilding her garden in pots on the apartment's balcony, her roses blooming despite the ash of their past. But the threats didn't stop. A rock shattered the bookstore's window one night. A note tied to it: "Leave." Caleb's blood ran cold. He confronted the sheriff, his voice shaking with rage. "Do your job," he shouted. The sheriff just shrugged, his loyalty to Tom clear. Caleb's father was a shadow over the town, his influence poisoning everything. Caleb wanted to fight, but Ruth's safety came first. One night, Ruth found him staring at the note, his hands clenched. "You can't carry this alone," she said, her voice soft but firm. She told him about Clara's death, how fear had kept them apart, how regret had haunted her. "Don't let fear win," she said. Caleb called Jamie, his voice breaking as he admitted his fear. Jamie listened, then said, "I'll wait for you. Always." The words were a lifeline, but Caleb wasn't ready to leave. He and Ruth started attending a small support group in a nearby town, a safe space for people like him. There, he met others who'd faced rejection, their stories knitting him back together. But Willow Creek's hatred was relentless. Caleb saw Hank and his friends watching the apartment, their eyes cold. He knew they weren't done. The fire had been a warning, and he feared what came next. The support group became Caleb's refuge, a place where he could breathe without fear. He met Sarah, a trans woman who'd been disowned by her family, and Marcus, a quiet teen who reminded Caleb of himself. Their stories of survival gave him strength, but the weight of Willow Creek's hatred never lifted. Ruth kept fighting, her spirit unbroken. She organized a fundraiser to rebuild the bookstore, inviting the support group to help. Caleb watched her charm strangers, her laughter a defiance of the town's cruelty. But he saw the toll it took. Her hands shook more. Her eyes tired. One evening, Caleb found a letter from his mother in the mailbox. His heart leapt, hoping for reconciliation. But the words were cold. You're tearing us apart. Leave Ruth out of this. The letter felt like a slap, reigniting his guilt. He showed it to Ruth, expecting her to soften. But she tore it up. Ellen's wrong, she said. You're my family, Caleb. He wanted to believe her, but doubt crept in. Was he selfish for staying? Jamie's texts were a daily reminder of another life, one where he could love freely. But leaving Ruth felt like abandoning the only person who'd ever truly seen him. The fundraiser was a small success, drawing a crowd from neighboring towns. Sarah and Marcus helped, their presence a quiet rebellion. But Hank and his crew showed up, their glares chilling. Caleb overheard them muttering about teaching them a lesson. His stomach twisted. That night, he and Ruth stayed up, planning to protect the bookstore. They installed a cheap security camera, its red light blinking in the dark. Caleb felt like a soldier in a war he didn't choose. But Ruth's courage kept him grounded. We don't run, she said, her voice a vow. Jamie called, sensing Caleb's fear. You're stronger than you know, he said. Caleb clung to his voice, a tether to hope. But as he hung up, he heard a crash downstairs. Heart pounding, he ran to the bookstore, finding the windows smashed. Rainbow paint splattered across the shelves. Ruth stood beside him, her face pale but resolute. They can break glass, but they can't break us, she said. Caleb nodded, but fear gnawed at him. The town was closing in, and he didn't know how much longer they could hold on. The vandalism broke something in Caleb. He felt like he was drowning, the town's hatred a tide pulling him under. Ruth refused to back down, cleaning the bookstore with Sarah and Marcus, their laughter a fragile defiance. But Caleb saw the strain in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she scrubbed paint from the walls. He confronted Nate at the hardware store, desperate for answers. Why do you hate me? He asked, his voice raw. Nate's face hardened. You chose this. You're dragging Grandma down with you. The words cut deep. But Caleb saw pain in Nate's eyes, a flicker of doubt. He went to the support group, pouring out his fear and guilt. Sarah hugged him, her voice steady. You're not the problem. They are. Marcus gave him a shy smile, his own courage a reminder that Caleb wasn't alone. But the fear lingered. Jamie visited again, his presence a balm. They walked by the river, hands entwined. And for a moment, Caleb felt free. I want you to be happy, Jamie said, his eyes searching. But I can't lose you to this town. Caleb kissed him, the world fading. But Ruth's face flashed in his mind. Back at the apartment, Ruth showed him a letter she'd written to the town paper, calling out the hatred. Someone's got to say it, she said, her voice fierce. The letter was published, sparking outrage. Hank and his crew protested outside the bookstore, their signs vile. Caleb wanted to fight, but Ruth stopped him. Words are our weapon, she said. The protests grew, the town dividing. Some neighbors left flowers at the bookstore, a quiet show of support. Caleb's mother called, her voice trembling. I want to understand, she said. Caleb's heart ached, but he couldn't trust her yet. That night, he and Ruth sat on the balcony, the stars bright above. You've given me a home, he said, tears falling. Ruth squeezed his hand. And you've given me purpose. But as they spoke, Caleb saw a flicker of light in the alley below a Molotov cocktail, its flame arcing toward the bookstore. The bookstore erupted in flames, the fire swallowing books and dreams. Caleb grabbed Ruth, pulling her to safety as sirens wailed. The crowd gathered, some cheering, others weeping. Caleb saw Hank smirk, his guilt clear. This time, the sheriff couldn't ignore it. Hank and two others were arrested, their hatred exposed. Ruth stood strong, her voice steady as she spoke to the crowd. Hate burns, but love rebuilds. Her words sparked something. Neighbors stepped forward, offering help. Caleb's mother appeared, tears in her eyes. I was wrong, she whispered, hugging him. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. Caleb and Ruth moved to Chicago with Jamie's help, leaving Willow Creek behind. They rebuilt, opening a small bookstore with a rainbow sign, "Love wins here." Sarah and Marcus visited, their laughter filling the space. Caleb's father never reached out, but Nate sent a letter, apologizing. It was small, but it was hope. Years later, Caleb stood in the bookstore, Jamie's hand in his, Ruth's roses blooming outside. The scars of Willow Creek remained, but so did their strength. Ruth, now frail but fierce, smiled at them. We made it, she said. Caleb looked at the family they'd built. Ruth, Jamie, their friends, and knew she was right. Hate had tried to break them, but love had won. They'd risen from the ashes, not just surviving, but thriving. Their story a testament to courage and the unbreakable bond of chosen family.